do gifts from fundraisers affect charitable gifts from donors? I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. George Newman. He's an associate professor of management and marketing at the University of Toronto. And George, thanks for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
My pleasure.
You are a psychologist by training. We share in common bachelor's degrees from Northwestern University. And you have studied a wide range of things, including the effects of gifts from the nonprofit to the donor associated with charitable giving. What did you find?
Well, in short, this is a question that we've been interested in for a number of years. And the upshot is that the offer of thank you gifts, despite people's expectations, actually seems to have a negative effect. So it reduces the amount that donors are likely to give.
Now, I want to ask you just more of at a macro level, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this, right? You're teaching management, you're teaching marketing. What led you to explore this topic in fundraising?
I had an interest in charitable giving. There's actually quite a bit of research in marketing and management on pro-social behavior and charitable giving, but this particular question just started out with let's see what we find, and we're curious. Do these kinds of offers actually increase people's likelihood of donation or how much they give? And when I started working with my colleague Jeremy Shen on this, we were pretty startled that at least in the initial results we were getting, that people seemed to be giving less, and then we just kind of followed that thread over several years.
And in terms of the research field, just for the sake of our audience, they know the fundraising school is within the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And there typically is a lot of overlap from the field of psychology into philanthropy and fundraising, because after all, charitable giving is based on philanthropic motivations. And we study motivations in psychology. And so, George, as I recall, you and your co-author, you conducted and or looked at 6 different studies, right, in this paper. And you actually, if I'm reading this correctly, thought that actually gifts would have a positive benefit on charitable giving. Like, why wouldn't it make sense that if I make a gift, I get a tote bag or a coffee cup or something? And yet, if you could expand upon a little bit, the research did not find that. Well, please explain that for us.
Yeah, so definitely that was our thinking going into this, is kind of a more is more. And I don't think you need a PhD in psychology or economics to make that prediction. And then when we started running these studies, we're basically running random assignment experiments where we're exposing people to 2 very similar kinds of scenarios. In one condition, we're asking, would you like to donate to this charity, and how much would you like to donate? And in the other condition, same information about the charity, but we were offering different types of gifts, whether it was a tote bag or a box of chocolates or a little tumbler to carry your drink around in. And we found very consistently across lots of different types of items that always people on average gave less in response to the thank you gift than if we just said, how much do you want to give? So it really seemed to have a negative effect relative to offering no gift at all.
What I love about the transparency of the paper and the research is, while you went into it thinking maybe more is more, a gift would lead to a higher charitable donation, when you found out that the opposite was true, that the offer of a gift lowered the donation, you then are able to explain this with some themes you're very familiar with in psychology and in economics in terms of motivations and crowding out. Could you explain that for our audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is actually a really interesting finding, and we were fortunate too that other teams found it interesting and have replicated it and picked up on it and actually tested it out in some very large field studies kind of in the wild. And so when you have a big and surprising effect like this, I think there's maybe a number of things that are going on. But one of the big ones that we looked at is kind of the signal that that it might send to others and even to yourself about your level of altruism or your level of commitment to the charity if you accept that gift. And in essence, our thinking was that people said, well, if I'm taking the gift for the donation, maybe it makes it seem like I'm not quite as generous as as if I didn't accept a gift. And so we actually found some evidence in support of that idea.
So people start wondering about their own altruism, their own compassion. They wonder, is the gift really about me supporting this nonprofit? And if I'm understanding you correctly, George, or is it really about me receiving this gift? And that starts getting complicated in the mind of the donor, it sounds like.
Right. I mean, it calls it at least into question, I would say. I'm not sure that people are doubting their level of altruism, but it raises a question maybe that's not there in the case when they're just asked how much they'd like to give. And interestingly, we found in subsequent work and others have that, a very subtle framing to the same offer. So if you think about it, a charitable purchase, buying a tote bag for $20 and the proceeds are going to go to charity is identical to donating that money and getting the tote bag in return. But we find that people actually have very different responses to those ideas. So even though kind of economically they're the same, when you frame it as a charitable purchase, now it's like, oh, I'm making a purchase and I get to, help out my favorite charity. And so it's kind of a win-win and people think about it very differently.
We also know, just as an aside, our school's research on generations, our millennials and our Gen Zs are really thinking that way, that their consumerism can be understood as part of their philanthropy as well. George, one of the things I love about the study, too, is towards the end, you and your co-author write, by the way, we're not saying all gifts are bad. You want to make sure, that what we're talking about here are a lot of the so-called kind of nominal gifts, the pen, the coffee mug, the mouse pad, the tote bag, as a condition of making the gift where it's advertised up front. If you could describe, you found out something a little bit different if the gift is unexpected, if it comes after the charitable donation. What did you find there?
That's right. Yeah. So in different studies, we kind of now started to play around with the gift. What can we do to maybe make people think about it a little bit differently? So certainly getting the gift after the fact, you didn't know you were going to get a gift in return, and now you get the gift. Well, that's back to the win-win territory. People like that because it maybe didn't factor into my decision or potentially into my decision as I was deciding to give. Another strategy that we used is to kind of reframe the gift. So if it was something like a tote bag, we said, hey, this is actually going to be great because as you carry it around, other people are going to see the logo and it's going to raise awareness for the cause. And so kind of reframing it in terms of these more altruistic terms also seem to kind of get rid of that negative effect of the thank you gift. So, one thing that was really fascinating to us is even though you get a robust decrease in how much people are giving in response to the thank you gifts, it also seems to be something, because it's driven by psychology, that is malleable and that's not fixed. And depending on how we talk about those gifts and explain them and the point at which we introduce them, you can actually, find some positive effects.
And one of those positive effects, and you touched on it there in that last response, I'd like to ask you please to expand upon. And it's that gift that is tied into the mission of the nonprofit. And so, an example might be, I could go to one of these warehouse stores and purchase 100 candles and maybe put a sticker with my nonprofit on it. And if you donate a certain amount, we'll send you the candle and you'll see the name of our nonprofit, as opposed to maybe what our nonprofit does is help teach people to make those candles as a way to make a skill. And, then those are sold and it raises money for the ministry. And the person in the program sees that they're being creative and productive and learning skills. That candle is different than the generic candle, if I'm understanding your research correctly. Am I? And could you please expand upon that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is, you might think of it as a continuity effect, or it's important that there's kind of like a tie-in between the gift and the cause. And again, if the central psychology really seems to be about, what does this say about my motives as a donor? What does this say potentially about my commitment to this organization. And so if you lead donors then to kind of think about those gifts as very much consistent with the mission of the organization and what you're trying to achieve, you can have a positive effect. You maybe even can encourage more giving. So it's not a blanket. This is always bad, but more kind of a cautionary note. If it's really important how we explain this and frame it to potential donors.
Well, this is just such smart, thoughtful research with wonderful application to everyday fundraising, with the interesting twist of a somewhat counterintuitive finding, as I think all of us would have initially thought, oh, a gift? Of course, that's going to spur donations. Not necessarily so. So, sometimes they say, donor beware. Well, fundraiser, charitable gift giving to the donor, beware. It's not meaning that all gifts are bad, but how they are framed, when they are presented, are they central to the mission, can all make a difference in your relationship with the donor. George, I would just like to ask you, just summarize any final advice you might have. Donors want to build fundraisers want to build long-term relationships with their donors. They want to stay in touch with meetings, stay in touch with emails, invite people to events. And maybe sometimes send along a little bit of a gift that's personalized to that donor or reflects the mission. As you think about your research and psychology overall in this particular study, what advice do you have for fundraisers?
I think, one is the importance of understanding your donors, and that's going to be specific to the organization. I think there's, lots of charities and nonprofits that are really making an effort to do that. But then also, as we're understanding the donors, understanding the way in which they might interpret different types of donation requests or different types of incentives, and especially how they interpret that in terms of their own identity and what it says about them. And so, if I was going to say a really kind of rule of thumb shorthand here is, I think it's fine to include gifts as part of donation and a relationship with donors, but maybe that's something that you send afterwards as a bonus. And now donors are thinking about it very differently. And they're able to kind of reflect on it and say, oh yeah, that was, I'm really happy that I contributed to this cause, and let me tell you about it. And it makes a great story for somebody else. So I think there is a lot of power in those kinds of reminders to our identity and our attachments to organizations, but you have to be careful with how you use them.
And George has mentioned others have built upon his study in the subsequent decade. And it's interesting to see that even when the gift is presented in the right context, the dollar amount of that gift, the value, how much was spent on that gift also plays a role, because if it's too much, the donor might think, did you spend some of my gift on buying this one? How much of it went to the mission of the organization? So George, that has come out, and your research helped funnel those additional learnings.
Yeah, that's a huge one that we didn't get into as well. Is, we've been talking about identity and what it says about donors, but there's also an inference about what it says about the organization. And as I'm sure all of your listeners are keenly aware, potential donors are very sensitive to considerations of efficiency and overhead. And so there's sometimes that those big extravagant gifts, or maybe if they seem kind of superfluous, people are making the wrong kind of inference about the charity and where maybe their values are at. So that's definitely another thing to be aware of on the nonprofit side of things.
Fascinating and great stuff. Dr. George Newman, Associate Professor of Management and Marketing, bringing his expertise in psychology and marketing and the business world to a key understanding to us in practical and effective and ethical fundraising. George, what a delight to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And we talk about donor stewardship in a specific course on this topic at the Fundraising School, and within each of our 25 public courses that lead to 5 different certificates, in person and online, in person in 10 U.S. cities, online anywhere around the world. And of course, we can customize our training just for you. We also have quarterly webinars and, of course, this weekly podcast. All of our knowledge is gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. Find all this information online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful to our producers today, the Emmy Award winner Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman, CFRM. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. You are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.